Thank you, Mr. Chair. I inadvertently submitted the same bill into committee, so I must issue a retraction for RS 25, or 25 RS 0750. Rookie mistake.
Okay, so did we get that number? Does everybody got it? Okay, thank you. And with that, a little bit of an update from yesterday. You know, we, as a committee, I still think we did a really, really great job. Yesterday in appropriations, some of our stuff was taken out, but we asked for about 36 million and we kept 30 and a half. And there was some agency goodwill, there was some great discussion. So I would like to just kind of continue what we can control in this committee and keep moving forward on conversations and learning. Two kind of big things, well, three, and then I want to open it up. I am wanting, so I'm on we have 4 members we have Representative Hill, Representative McDonald, myself, and I thought there was another one, and then Estes, who's Representative Estes, and then even Dr. Harwood is on that. You do what? And yeah, I mean, so that's kind of why I was saying this. We have a lot of the crew on this committee, and it's something that will probably, hopefully, come through this committee because it's a budget issue. I know it's a policy, but it's really where the bulk of the money comes through for our schools. So the funding formula incubator is kind of the verbiage in my mind, and then the rest of the committee can use some of what we study, and we bring some of the ideas that maybe they don't have time to have the whole hearing in our limited meetings, but they could easily watch it when they're on the road, or they can suggest things to us, and we could suggest things through this committee of what do we need to know, what do we need to think about, and I even learned some things from Dr. Harwood of, you know, just some of the expertise that exists right around us that I think we need to lean into. So we're going to do that on this committee the rest of the time. So we kind of take our hat off of the budget for this year, and now we're looking towards next year somewhat. And we got to keep an eye on it, and we'll do that in appropriations and on the floor. But through this committee, now we're kind of looking forward. We were hands-on, and now we're looking forward. The other thing that we've talked about is the reports from the legislature, requested by the legislature to KSDE, some of them that we look at, most of them that we don't, and let's clean that up. So we're going to spend some time on that, probably starting next week. And then I also just had a meeting about fast bridge screeners that brought up a topic. There is, I don't know how much, but this is one that it got some COVID relief money, and however many other ones like that are going to be good programs that are, where's the funding going to come from? So that's a budgetary thing that we need to have in our mind for the future of how much of that are we looking at, and which ones are we going to need to find some workaround and at least have the knowledge of what's coming. So, and then I just open that up to things that, so those are kind of some of my priorities just for right now, with getting my head back above water yesterday and today, to come back in and let's push forward. I would say just in private, if there is a time for a committee hearing that you would like to see a specific topic talked about, I would definitely entertain that, and we'll just see kind of what comes in through the filter of what's here. But if you have funding formula incubator ideas, definitely bring those. That's what I'm calling it. I like it. So we're going to go with that. And the report stuff, we'll start on that next week and maybe try and tackle reports next week, and then see what we can build out from there. So appreciate everybody's work for the last few weeks where we were fast and furious. Now we've got a little bit of a different pace, but let's stay engaged on some good topics, and I'll try and keep us there. With that, today we have a presentation from the department, from Dr. Harwood, that we were going to hear a couple weeks ago on a Thursday, that got covered up by us voting out School of the Deaf, School of the Blind, where we all learned how long we take to vote things out. And so I'll bring you up, Dr. Harwood, and appreciate your presence and your presentation today.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So yes, this was scheduled for January 22nd. So you did receive the PowerPoint at that time. However, you should receive an updated PowerPoint because, probably surprising to all of you, there have been more questions since January 22nd, and I've tried to include some of that information in the PowerPoint today. So as I've talked to Chair Getz about, this presentation may in fact elicit more questions, which we would be happy to continue to work on. I appreciate the chair's idea of there's still a lot of days left in the sessions. For some people's sake, maybe you won't schedule on Friday just to learn about something for next year, but you never know what happens. But we are happy to come and present whatever information that the committee wants to know more about. So to start off with, this was a series of questions that we originally received from the chair and vice chair. So one of the things that KSD has done in the past to this committee was a state of it's kind of the state of the schools thing that's something similar to what has done in Senate Ed and House Ed in the past. We've kind of mixed things up a little bit, but I did want to do a little bit with some student achievement. So this is one part. I'm not going to get to a lot of conversation about this, but this because it comes up a lot. When we talk about the 4 levels of performance on the state assessment, we get a lot of questions about grade level and above grade level, and that's not really what the state assessment measures, because every question on the state assessment is at grade level. So level 1, and if you look at the title, a student at level 1 has a limited ability to interact with what would be considered grade level material. Doesn't mean they can't read. It means that at grade level, they have a limited ability to interact with those questions and that material. At level 2, it's a basic ability to interact with it. Level 3 is effective, and level 4 is excellent. Where there gets to be a lot of conversation is around proficient. So just to kind of get that out of the way, when the State Board of Education did their last report to the Federal Department of Education, they had to define what proficient was. By federal law, you have to have 2 levels below proficient. And when they move from 5 levels to 4 levels, that means you have to be in 3 and 4 to be proficient, which is different than grade level and all those kinds of things. So that's just how some of that vocabulary gets skewed based on, well, 3 and 4 can only be proficient because you had to have 1 and 2 below it in order to meet the federal guidelines for assessments. So we can talk more about that, or if you have questions about it, happy to do that. But a little bit about the 2024 assessment. Yeah, this is 2024, and we didn't change the 2023 at the top. But you'll see that this is from 19 through 2024, and this is math. And so these charts are sometimes hard to read. You want the blue bar to get smaller and the red bar to get bigger. So that's the way it works. And you'll notice that there was the level 1 increased slightly. Level 4 increased slightly. So this would be mixed results. Not a big change in any direction, but there's a little bit of positive, a little bit of negative, depending on which side you're on. We're focused more on getting students out of level 1, which I'll talk about a little bit more. So this would probably be considered a decrease in student performance in math. So in reading, same chart. In this case, there was a slight decrease in level 1 and a slight increase in level 4. So this would show a slight increase in reading performance. I say slight, I'm not getting into significant, because then you get statistically significant. The numbers of this are so large that you don't need much of a change to be considered statistically significant. But when you're talking about less than a percentage point, then it's pretty slight. So, but when you look at what was happening and we were moving in the wrong direction, and now for the last 3 years, we've been moving more in the right direction, although slowly. So that would be math and reading. And then science, again, science only gets tested in 3 grades, 5, 8, and 11. And again, we had a decrease in level 1 and an increase in level 4. This was actually a little stronger improvement in science. Science, I will tell you, jumps around more than the other two for 2 reasons. One, it's a smaller group of students, and it's also only at those 3 grades. And so you'll see fluctuation more in that, but that's kind of where we're with that. And so we've done more presentations on student performance, but we were kind of keeping it short to get to the other ones. Any questions just about state assessments? Because again, the chairman brought up FastBridge. That's a completely different assessment. We talked about in House Ed, so happy to talk about that in the future as needed.
And just an announcement and then a couple representatives. Jennifer just emailed you this presentation if you want to follow along in your email or pull it up on your computer and follow along there to make your notes. Representative McNorton and then Representative McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So Dr. Harwood, out of that, whatever we're here, 39.72%, what percentage of those students will not be able to meet that level 3? I mean, there's got to be a number of students that just don't have the mental capacity to, do we know what that number is, or do we look at that anytime to see if it affects these numbers?
So, and I'll talk specifically about reading, so I'll go back, because there's been a lot more conversation around this, around the blueprint and letters and all those kinds of things. So, you know, the people from letters would say that 95% of students can be, I don't know what word they talk about, but grade level, proficient, whatever it is. The problem with that is that their number is at the 25th percentile. So that means 75% of everybody else is doing better than they are. So they're saying that 95% of the students should be able to get to the 25th percentile. If you know anything about statistics, that doesn't make any sense, because what will happen is as soon as you move up, then the ranges change. So not sure how that works. What we have talked about is that with reading, we're at about 32% in level 1. Our goal is to cut that in half as we implement the letters training. In math, statewide, we're not doing as much organized things. So we don't have the same kind of goal right there, other than the goal that the state board had to turn in to the federal government is that 75% of all students in levels 3 and 4, that would be what we would call a stretch goal. That would be really impressive. So we think we can get the level 1 down to about 10%. The issues we run into is that when you think about special education, only 2% of the special education population can take the alternative assessment, which is geared to their learning goals. Everybody else has to take the regular assessment. Some of those students are significantly behind, and we're doing everything we can to catch them up, but there will always be some percentage of students. We think we can get that down to 10%. Our goal is 15% as we do this other part. Yep.
Representative McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've heard a lot about cut scores and how each state determines their cut scores, and that in Kansas, because we have really high standards, we set our cut scores really high. Can you talk a little bit more about that and like comparatively?
So the best information from this actually comes from NAEP, and I have not spent much time with the most recent NAEP because I was busy with K-12 budget. But so when you look at NAEP reports, and I'm not sure that this has been reported for 2024, what you find is that Kansas standards and the cut scores put us very high on that. And there's a specific graphic we can get for you to send that we've used over and over again. And what it does is a comparison of, well, based on NAEP scores, if our students were in these other states, what would be their level of proficiency based on their standards? And so it tries to do that. NAEP is difficult because the standards aren't necessarily the same, and it's not all students. It's a representative sample now. It's supposed to be random, so it should be representative. But we can get that chart for you. Yeah.
Representative Brantley, and then over to Representative Estes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for being here, Dr. Harwood. So I have a question, and as you look at the different levels, there always seems to be a little bit of confusion of where exactly are the students within that level. So do we have, if I scored a 180 and I'm in level 1, and a 182 is in level 2, do we have a cut there that is maintained year to year that teachers can look at? Because you might be almost to that next level, but you're still blocked into that entire level.
So yeah, we have that information. So each student receives a scale score, and the scale score is what goes with the cut score. So I don't remember these off. I think that the cut score for level 3 is like 300. And so you'd have a scale score. So if you were at 299, you would know that, yeah, I was one question away from being in level 3. The problem with that for teachers using that is that information is not available at a time that's helpful if this was in 3rd grade. And then the 4th grade standards are different. And so that's where you get into the situation of using this as longitudinal data when you start looking at scale scores, because the standards are different. Some of them spiral, which means you'll have standards at 3rd grade that you'll get again at 5th grade, and then you'll get again at 8th grade. And so some of those you can do more with. There's been reluctance to provide as much specific indicator level things as it used to be on the last test, because there's only 2 or 3 questions on the test, and it could be misleading, and it led districts to focusing on one indicator more so than other because they thought it was more of it. So the numbers there, it's not as helpful for planning, but you can look at how did they do on these standards, and what are those standards in this grade, and how do I help catch them up, or how do I help them continue to excel if that's where they're at.
And I totally agree with you. I do think there's some benefit for a teacher to be able to see that score and know where the aim line is, because otherwise you're just heading in one direction. You have no idea how close you are to your destination. So I would encourage providing that to teachers, because they're pretty good with numbers when they can actually see that and know where that target's going to be. Thank you.
So districts would have access to scale scores and the performance levels for every student.
It just seems like at times that it's a little hard to dig and find those scores to be able to provide them to others. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Estes.
Okay, Dr. Harwood, your previous answer about NAEP, I thought could be confusing, because my understanding is NAEP does 2 different things. One is rate our standards. That's correct?
So I don't know that rate is, I'm not sure if rate is the right word, but there is a standards comparison. And so
they say we have very high standards.
Yes.
Okay. Then a completely separate function is our NAEP scores. And the same cut is used for everybody on the NAEP test across the nation, correct?
That is correct.
Okay, so I just wanted to clarify that, because everywhere I go, people have it confused, and they think that our cut scores get applied to our national NAEP test scores. And thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for the clarification of time.
No, it's a great clarification, because it can be a little bit confusing. So I appreciate that.
All right. So then, moving on, we got a question, and it was that the Kansas State Board of Education was advised that the 10th grade tests were not helpful and should be eliminated. So that was a little stronger worded than what I had heard. Commissioner Watson did talk to the state board either last month or the month before about the 10th grade assessment. And I will tell you that working with educators for years on the 10th grade assessment, there is concern that the performance on the 10th grade assessment especially is not indicative of the student's abilities because they don't care about the test. Okay? So one of the things that that the commissioner has talked about is maybe we should move away from the 10th grade assessment. Now, federal law says that we have to test all grades 3 through 8 and 1 grade at high school. But what he has proposed and what we would be, what he said we're going to start talking to the feds about a waiver for is that as opposed to the 10th grade assessment, a student, based on their individual plan of study, which is what they want to do in the future, would choose between the ACT if they're planning on four-year college, work keys if they're planning on going right into the to work or a technical field, or the ASVAB if they're planning to go to the military. So the student would choose their assessment based on what their plans are for life. Now, that would not be allowed under current federal law because you have to have the same test and it has to be standards driven, and that's not in there. But there are other states that have gotten waivers for other things to look at. It would require one change in state statute, and that state statute requires that we give all assessments virtually. And right now there is not a virtual option for the ACT or work keys, and I'm not sure about the ASVAB, but it's those situations where for the 10th grade test, if we tried to go that direction, we would need permission from the legislature that those tests would not have to be virtual. Now, the good news is those students should be taking those tests if that's what they want to do. And what we would be using is a measure of, well, how well are we preparing them for what they want to do? So that's the comment. So again, the 10th grade test, and I will say that having been in schools, third graders want to do really well because they love their teacher. You'll always see, typically with state assessment scores, wherever there's a change from elementary to middle, you'll usually see a dip. And part of that is because now, instead of being with one teacher that they love, hopefully, now they're with several different teachers that they're less likely to want to do it for the teacher. And so you see some of that. And the idea is that you're still trying to encourage students to do the best that you can, because that's how we need to figure out what we need to do next. If you're not doing the best you can, we might do the wrong thing next.
Representative McDonald.
Thank you. Before we leave this slide, I have 2 high schoolers, and they've taken the ACT more than once. So I think we might keep that in mind. Your first time, you don't always do so well. So would there be something built in like that? Even if it was just for 10th grade, if you took it 3 times in 10th grade, could you count your best score?
So the way we do ACT reporting is it's for the graduating class, and it is best score. ACT allows for super scoring now, which means that you can take the best each unit, so math, you can take the math score from one test and the reading score from another test and put it together for your best score.
Representative Estes.
I'm not seeing this the same way that it's being seen by the Department of Education. Because when I lay over post-secondary outcomes, they correlate exactly to each one of those levels, and I would not want to give up on the information that we get out of the assessments, because that correlation is so strong. And if we have 70% of level 1 students not getting something post-secondary, and that changes so dramatically for each of the levels, that's a very strong correlation.
Actually, I have a slide for that. All right. So next was just about state assessments. I had a question about how much we spend on state assessments. And so you'll see we spend about $7.4 million on state assessments. The vast majority of that are federal funds. Kansas typically is 49th or 50th in SGF per student for testing. Just as an example, we're at about $2.42 per student. Florida, because we looked at this a couple of years ago because there was a question, is over $20 per student from the state general fund for testing. And what that does is it's a difference in the number of the forms of the tests that they can have, which is why you see other states where they say, yeah, you can see all these questions because those are expired questions that they're no longer using because they're investing more in the test, and so that you have more forms to pick from. There's also some more robustness on being able to do, I guess, more robust questioning other than just multiple choice tests, which is actually something that will be different with the next version. So I mean, that was a question, just wanted to kind of get that out there. This was already approved with the department's budget. So next are graduation rates. We looked at this slide and tried to, it's like our graduation rates are really pretty good. They're the highest they've ever been. It's almost 90%. The goal is 95%. And so you'll see that we were moving along in a good trajectory. The surprising things for folks is what about 2023? And understanding that that's pandemic related, because graduation rates, it's a 4-year cohort. So a high school is responsible for everybody that starts their freshman year graduating in 4 years. If they leave and you don't know where they went, they count as a non-graduate. So that impacts your graduation rate. So during the pandemic, we had students leave, and if they went to a home school, which is not an accredited school that they're transferred to, they would count as a non-graduate. So, I mean, that's a little bit of what we have, that we saw a little bit of a dip there. I mean, for example, if you go to a non-accredited private school, even if it's a college prep school, for the public school, that person would count as a non-graduate. Because if they didn't transfer to another accredited school, then that's just how they count. So when we get to the question about, we will never be at 100% graduation rate, the other reason for that is that the 18 to 21-year-old program, by federal law, you can't let them graduate or they don't get they're not eligible for the services for the next 3 years. Now, you'll notice if in your hometown, you'll see the students a lot of times go through the graduation ceremony with their class, which is very appropriate, but they don't officially graduate until they age out at 21 or whenever they're done with their services. So there are some things in there where we shouldn't set a 100% graduation rate because there are some things that go on well beyond our control and even would be a violation of federal law, basically, if we got to 100%. So we're hoping now that with we've gotten through the last of the students that were in high school during the pandemic, that we'll see the trajectory go back up, and we saw a little bit of that for last year.
Representative Steele.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Dr. Harwood. Is that a federal statute of how that graduation? Okay, I thought so. So if a student starts in Manhattan, let's say, their freshman year and their sophomore year, they go to Rock Creek. So it's but then let's say their junior year, they leave and go to a home school.
So they would count against Rock Creek's graduation rate, because when Manhattan transferred them to an accredited school district, so they're out of Manhattan's cohort, now they're in Rock Creek's cohort.
Okay.
And so, yeah.
So the freshmen, so the graduation rate of when the students start their freshman year, so if they were a sophomore and they moved.
So basically your cohort starts when you start your freshman year. And so you're part of the cohort of.
Okay, it's at a cohort, not just your freshman year. Okay, I was confused by that for a second.
And so you remain in that high school's cohort unless you transfer to another accredited school.
Yep, I got you now. Thank you.
It all has to do with the exit code that when they leave your district.
I misunderstood you the first time. That's why I was questioning. All right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, so along with graduation rate, another thing that the state board is looking at are post-secondary success rates. And this one can be a little bit difficult to follow because we take the graduation rate and then we look at what students are doing 2 years after graduation. And so to be counted as successful, and I'm not a big fan of that term, should be post-secondary outcomes, because success has a lot of different ways for success. But to be counted as successful, you have to have completed an industry-recognized certificate in high school or within 2 years after graduating. You have to have, be enrolled continuously in a post-secondary program. So if you take 1 year off and come back the second year, you don't count. Or if you start the first year and then don't go back the second year, you don't count. Let's see, post-secondary, or you have earned a post-secondary degree. So if you graduate with an associate's degree, then that would count. So this is where this gets a little bit tricky and why the goal is 75%. Because we don't have great data all the time. So the data we get on post-secondary comes from the National Clearinghouse. The reason they have data is they're the ones responsible for when you have to start repaying your student loans. So they get the data from all of the colleges so that they can let people know, hey, are you still enrolled and you still going? So that's where the data comes from. The problem is that a student that leaves high school and goes off and, well, let's see, so goes to college 1 year and then gets drafted in an NBA and makes $8 million a year would not be successful under this definition. So that's where a little bit, and we don't get any data from the military at this point. So if you join the military, we don't have records on you. So that's why it's 75%. We are working with, as part of our, some of the work we're doing, we're trying to work with the Department of Revenue, with the Department of Labor, and then come up with earning guidelines. At some point, somebody's going to have to say, to be counted as successful, you have to earn this much as a 20-year-old. I don't want to be the one that says that, but at some point we have to make that decision. We're also working with Kansas is actually the lead partner in working with the Department of Defense with our congressional representatives on getting the U.S. Department of Defense to share information so that we can count that way as well. So we are trying to kind of get a broader scope of what successful is, which is why I think it really should be post-secondary outcomes. But that's how it's working. Now you'll see that what we've seen is, although the graduation rate has increased, we've seen a decrease in some of the outcomes. And so part of this also we think is COVID related, because students took a year off and didn't go to college right away because I don't want to go to online school in college. So there were a lot of decisions making. So, and this is always 2 years old, because the class of 2022 has to be out for 2 years before we get the data. So we're still looking at some of that data at this point.
Representative Brantley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just had a clarification. So I've always heard that like a rural area, if you had farming, ranching, and a student got out of high school and went to work on their family farm or ranch, that district was dinged, for lack of word, on their post-secondary success.
So, yeah, I mean, if you have a district that you have a high number of graduates that are going right to work, whether it's ag or anything else, they're not going to show up in these numbers because we don't have any way to evaluate what's happening with that. We're working on that with some of the income information and trying to look at other ways to do it. But when we started it, all we had was the National Clearinghouse data, and we said, we're going to start with what we have, and then we'll try to grow it from there. And we get feedback all the time from districts about, can we just count this person, or, hey, I know this, and we've shied away from letting districts go back and say, marking somebody as successful. We'd rather it be systematic.
Got it. Thank you.
I'll just say that's probably your most vague graph I've ever seen, because there's just a lot, there's just a lot of space in it. 85, 87% and down to 60. Anyway, it's a graph. Just just doesn't say a lot. So I hear what you're saying. It's just one.
Well, yeah, you really have to. I mean, and what goes into it is fairly complex, and you have to kind of know all of those pieces to have it make any sense for you. Yep.
Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. How does that account for military?
It does not, because we don't have any, at this point, we are not able to get data about them being in the military. We're working on it. Actually, yeah, so they're,
In Representative Estes, I'll let her speak to it, but yeah, Dr. Watson.
We're really, really close. Ron has been working with Dr. Watson, and we are so close.
This close?
well, I will
Thank
tell
you.
you, it took them 6 months to put together a press release that we were going to work on it. So,
Real close could be
My
2
glass
years.
might be more half full, but
we are hoping to have what the, yeah, so it's moving at the speed of government, so, yes.
Mr. Chairman,
Sorry.
and just so you know, statistically, it's a teeny tiny part of our total number.
Okay,
It's not a big number.
sure.
All right, so next are average composite, or ACT composite scores, and you'll notice that there's been a steady decline. So in 2022, when did we start doing all students? 2019, sorry. So it was higher before 2019. So when the state started paying for ACT scores, the more students that take the ACT, typically the lower the score. And mostly that's because you're empowering students to take the ACT that probably weren't planning to, and maybe didn't prepare as well in high school as you would have liked to be there. It's not always true. Sometimes a student that never took an advanced class scores great. So it's all over the board. The other reason that's come up since the pandemic goes back to something that Representative McDonald did. Colleges moved away from using the ACT for admissions. And when that happened, students stopped taking it multiple times. And the biggest improvement is from your first time to your second time taking the ACT. After that, you have to be pretty conscientious to make a big jump after that. So we are seeing that some decline, because if you only take it once, typically your score is lower. The only reason students were taking it multiple times is if they were going to be in line for scholarships that were ACT based. Now, the region schools are moving back to some of those things with a GPA or GPA and ACT score, so we may see a change in that in the future. But again, students stopped caring about the ACT so much, because if you weren't going to get a really high score to get a scholarship, a 15 or a 20 didn't make any difference for you. So, all right. So the next one, this was the chart that Representative Estes alluded to a little bit ago, and a little bit to what Representative Brantley talked about. So this one actually works a lot better when it's animated, and I can only pull up some things at a time. But what you see on the far left, it says low 1. So they would be in the bottom half of level 1. High 1 is the top half of level 1 based on where the cut scores are. And so the first one are, so green is ELA and blue is math. So 72% of the students that are in the lowest, or in the bottom part of level 1, graduate on time, compared to 89%, which is the average. And again, this is for the 10th graders in 2017 that graduated in took the test between 2017 and 2019. We didn't have an update this year because we needed 10th graders that took the test in 2020, and we didn't give the test in 2020. So we'll have a new one. This is the same one from last year. But if you look at that, then you move on. So let's look at high 2. So they have a basic ability to interact with grade level material, and they're graduating at 93 or 94%. They are having post-secondary success at 60 to 64%, which means they're going on to do something else. And their average ACT score is 19.7 or 20.2, depending on which one it is. So clearly, and to Representative Estes' point, there is a correlation between a 10th grader's performance on the state assessment and what happens later on. So we're not arguing that. And the idea that, you know, a lot of the students that are in level 2 are being pretty successful, but if they're in level 3 or level 4, they're even more successful. How much of that is tied to how much they care about the test and all those are the kind, I mean, now you're getting to the whole student. But this is helpful information that we're trying to expand on in the idea of if you look at the attributes or the performance of students at lower grades and what their later success is or later outcomes are, you can intervene earlier. So that's one of the things that would be there. I mean, one of the things, the easiest one to intervene with is graduation rate. Because to graduate, you have to get credits. So as if a freshman or a sophomore, you're failing classes, it's easy to see right away, hey, we've got to help this student get credits. Skills are harder because they're not measured as I guess, as acutely as credits are for graduation. So, but still worth working on. Okay. All right. So then I want to talk a little bit about KISA, which is the Kansas Education Systems Accreditation. So the state board in 24-25 approved a new model. And so that's what we're working with now. And so it's all based around 4 fundamentals. And so districts pick up to 2 fundamentals that they are going to work on for their school improvement. And those are structured literacy, standards alignment, balanced assessment system, and quality instruction. Then there are structures within that so they can kind of move things down. So the way the system works is that all of the districts across the state were grouped with like districts. And so they have a school improvement day where they get together and they get to collaborate on what they're doing for school improvement. What are the things that they're doing that are working? What are their questions? Where are they having problems? And then after that, they put together an action plan. And then the action plan has 6-month and 1-year check-ins. And we have staff across the state that are assigned to different schools, and they go and meet with districts and say, hey, how's it going? We have staff there right now that evaluate the plans that come in, not necessarily for the interventions that we think the districts know that. It's for clarity and is it measurable and looking at more of the process. Right now, the accreditation is based on, did you put together your plan and did you get it turned in and are you meeting with people? What will come in later are then some of the outcomes, which would be graduation rate, state assessments, post-secondary success. I think there might be another one. So then after that, it's, are you making progress? Are you at a level that has been said of, if you're above this level and you're not making progress, it's okay. But if you're below that level, you have to be making progress. But then what we can do then is target the limited resources we have for intervening with districts to the districts that need it the most. So that's what we're working on. We're in the first year of it. So.
I have a question on that. So how does this differ from what was?
So so a big difference, the last one was very process oriented, and it was all about, you met with, you had an outside visiting team, which could have been educators from across the state. You'd meet with them once a year, you'd put together this plan and this big document, and did you have a process in place? This one moves it to much more collaborative, where you're working with other districts to put the plans together, and it has the student objectives or the student outcomes piece added into it. So we're starting again with the process. Do you have the plan? And then the next part is, let's bring in the outcomes, and then do your outcomes match we'll get to that. Do the outcomes that you're working on or that you're seeing, do they match your plan? So should you expect to get improvement in your outcomes from what you're working on? So that would be the big difference.
Okay. Representative Brantley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And this is just a comment. I've heard some really positive things from districts that this has been a good improvement with the evidence that they have to upload. And so thank you for that.
A lot of the comments we've heard is the last one seemed like busy work, and this one seems like we're doing things. One is the collaboration has probably been the biggest positive thing so far, and that's what we've done the most of. they enjoy getting together with like districts to talk about what they're doing and what they can do better. Okay.
Any other questions? Are we good? All right, you can, Representative Estes.
This may be a deeper conversation than kind of the generalized stuff, or if you want to answer me offline, that's okay. I know we used to accredit for every 5 years, and I really love that this is looking annually, and I do see a lot of benefits to the new system. Do we reach a point at which we say a district or a building needs intervention beyond what they're doing, and what does that look like?
So I will say the system has the processes to do that. I would say it's less defined what that looks like, and some of that has to do with scale, because we only have resources to help so much. And so if it's only a couple of districts, we can probably do a lot. If it's, I mean, and it may be prioritizing for that. So I would say that as we move into it and we get more of the outcomes in there, the ARC, which is an acronym for Accreditation Review Committee. So one of the differences there is that the ARC used to just read things. Now what they're doing is they're going out and visiting with teams or with schools that are seen as needing help.
I'll go with Representative McDonald, and then I'll come to you. Sorry.
I'll just be really quick. Representative Estes and I are on the Literacy Advisory Committee, and we had a presentation about this a couple weeks ago, and we were all really impressed. One thing I wanted to focus on is that structured literacy is one of the 4 things on your screen there. And I applaud the Department of Ed for leading the charge of science and reading and getting all of our teachers the best tools in their toolbox. And in that spirit, last year we passed the blueprint for literacy so that we could further that effort and just kind of get an injection of goodness so that we get more teachers prepared to teach literacy. But I gather in the higher ed committee that was stripped from our budget last week. So I just would encourage everyone to advocate, if they could, for that to get put back in, because at this point we have defunded the blueprint for literacy unless I missed something in appropriations.
Representative Steele.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to echo, I've had a couple school districts talk about the power of the collaboration, so excellent work. Can you just tell me how, like when I think like-minded schools, I think a lot of people may think like Acacia, like 1A, like are we talking more region specific?
So when I say like schools, not necessarily like-minded, but region is one of them because the state is long. So we try to limit that, but it would actually be districts that have similarities in student population, or that's how we would be grouping them together.
Like Acacia, like these are 1A schools, these are, but more geographically located?
Now, school size makes a difference because it does make a big difference in the resources you have and how you might approach things. So school size would be part of it, but it would also be student demographics and some outcomes and those things as well.
Awesome, thank you, Mr. Chair.
I see you got a few slides left, so I'll let you get back on it.
All right, so the next one is the at-risk accountability plan. So this was part of the House sub for Senate Bill 387. And so just a little bit of background, we can do more about this later, but so in 26-27, all school districts have to submit an at-risk accountability plan. So right now, we are working on with a pilot group. It was supposed to be 10 districts. We had 13 volunteers. And so we spent the fall kind of coming up, what in general, what we want it to be. So what you'll see there are these sections of what the report will have, which is there's going to be some district background. We think it's important because this is going to be a public document, that there's some context that the district gets to talk about. This is who we are, and this is what we do, and those kinds of things. And then there's cohort identification, and this is important because the bill or the law requires that each district select 2 cohorts. One of them has to be 3rd grade. Next year, after we've had a chance to do this, we might be coming back and say fourth grade would be the better required one, but that's for later. And you have to set a 4-year goal that if they don't meet the goal, then there's a penalty in your at-risk, in the increase in your at-risk funding. That gets missaid a lot, that you lose at-risk funding. That's not true. What you lose is some or all of the increase in the base aid that goes towards that risk. And so this is a change for districts about how you set goals, because you're not, I mean, some people thought that because it's mentioned in the law that the 75% at levels 3 and 4, that is not required. The district sets the goal. That would be an unrealistic goal that nobody would get to. So it's helping districts set goals for the students who are in the cohort that are achievable with effort and intervention. The other difference is this is a closed cohort. So you identify the students the first year. If somebody leaves, you don't put somebody back in. So the cohort moves up. So one of the issues that's going to come up are for really small districts. We have districts that don't have 10 third graders to start with, let alone 10 at-risk third graders. So we're going to have to figure something out for that. We also have districts that can put together a cohort of 10 or 15, but are highly mobile, and those they won't have 10 of the same students at the end. So those are some things we have to work towards. So we have a subcommittee that's meeting now, working on assessments, how to identify students for a cohort, how to put together interventions, how to measure the progress towards the goal. The other part of it is expense reporting. So districts will have to have basically fund level accounting of their at-risk fund as part of the report. And then there's some annual reporting just about how many, actually the annual reporting is very similar to what they already do. The difference would be is you have a question about are your cohorts on track to meet their goals? So.
Representative McNorton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I remember this bill last year, Dr. Harwood, but we're letting the school districts come up with their own goals. Do we have a minimum? I don't think we did. So, I mean, 1/10 of 1% something is an improvement?
So,
Or do they have to be a realistic, some type of, I mean, I don't think we had that in the bill.
the bill or the law does not stipulate anything like that. The advice that I've been giving to districts is if you don't do something reasonable, the legislature will solve that problem for you. So if you don't want something like that, which I think a one-size-fits-all is a bad idea, we need districts to set reasonable goals with reasonable sized cohorts. And that's part of what the plan is. Why did you pick that cohort? Why did you pick that goal? And so that's part of what we're talking about is this is about school improvement. We've tried to talk about that if we do this right, it will help students. Hopefully to the point where we can convince the legislature we should take away the penalty phase, because we can trust districts to set quality goals and intervene as they should.
Representative Schmoy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just wondering, when we're talking about the at-risk cohort groups, and you said that there's some fluctuation in some that makes it really hard to track, are we seeing most of those around like military bases, or what would be the reasoning for that?
So districts that have a high proportion of systemic poverty, there is a lot of mobility along with that as well. So, if you want to take military Fort Leavenworth, they turn over their population every 3 years anyway. So it's going to be difficult for them for a different reason. But we have other highly mobile districts for a lot of different reasons. So it just depends.
All right, thank you very much.
So I had a couple questions. One, I think it'd be fun for this committee to be able to engage in some of those districts. I think it's first thing I saw, it's pretty awesome that 10 was required, 13 wanted to. So kind of there's an essence of a good idea if people want to engage this. They see there is an issue around it and want to get better. That's awesome, like that. And then, so if I could know, or if we can know who those districts are and kind of be as engaged in the process. If it is in our area, maybe Dodge City is one of them. I don't know yet, but darn it. And then, just a statement around the longitudinal goal of this was a big part of it. And I'm actually very excited about this program getting started and being able to watch kind of what the year-to-year growth and those goals can look like. So thank you for the report on it.
So the districts were approved during a public session of the State Board of Education, so it's public. We'll send you the list. What I envision is that they will prepare their first plan next fall. And so when we have the recommendations we make about changes we think need to happen before everybody does it in 26, 27, would have the districts come and present their plans and talk to you about, this is why this was hard, and if you made this change, it would make more sense and be easier. So I think that's an important part.
Representative McNorton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So if the test ones are going to get their data to us at the end of next year, are you going to be able to turn that around quick enough for the 26, 27 school year? If you aren't going to get the data back until the spring of 26, yeah. Can you turn that around for the full rollout by 26, 27?
Yes.
Okay.
So we're building the system. So right now we have we're kind of in the planning stage. Next year we'll be able to build the system to collect all the data. For this next one, it probably will not be a very sophisticated system, but for 13 districts, we can do it with Word and Excel. It's not a big deal. It's when you get to 286 that you have to have a system to manage that. So we need to have that in place by the fall of 2026, which means we have to have the plan in place kind of well finalized by January of 26 so we can move forward with that. And so if you look at this, the pilot districts will report the expenses and annual reporting this year. Now that'll probably just be on a spreadsheet versus something fancy that they send in, just so we kind of go from that. But that was actually in the law that part is reported in 2025. All right. So some of these other questions, we'll go faster. So this is teacher vacancy data. And so just on this is that the red line, put it in as red because that's bad. Those were positions that had no applicants. And so good news is that number went down. No applicants means if there is somebody filling that position, it is a long-term sub. Or they just didn't fill the position at all, so that whatever they were doing, not getting done. The yellow bar is they have an applicant, they filled the position with somebody that's not fully qualified, but is a licensed teacher. This a lot of times happens in special education where they are a certified teacher. They may be working on a program, they haven't gotten far enough along to get a waiver. So all those things are in there. But that number went up. But that does mean we have more licensed professional teachers working with students than we had before, just working on making sure they're licensed in the right areas. Next part was we talked about retention rate. So this is a chart of retention rate after the third year. And so you'll notice that pretty good there in 2013, and we started trailing off. And in 2017, the state board instituted a 2-year mentor program for licensure. So a new to the profession teacher gets an initial license, and to move to a professional license, they have to have 2 years of mentoring. So in 2018, the legislature added a mentor stipend, and we started seeing some improvement, and then we had the pandemic, and we lost a lot of people, and now we're kind of growing back. So, the mentoring part, I will tell you from experience, interviewing teachers, we have new teachers asking, what does your mentoring program look like? That's a question districts get asked by well-prepared. When the person asks that question, that kind of moves them up on the list because you think they have a better idea of what they're getting into. The person says, oh, I don't need a mentor. you're a little worried about that person because they may not have a great idea what they're getting into. They might be fine, but you just never know. One of the things about this is that the impact of this is that, I mean, just like with any industry, if your candidate pool is shallower, sometimes you're hiring people that you might not otherwise hire. And so it does make a difference in teacher quality, which is why mentoring is so important for new teachers, helping them improve their craft, but also stay in the classroom. The next one is a little bit more confusing. This is a mentor teacher number. So this is where you added $700,000 for mentor stipends that got taken out in appropriations, but I went ahead and left this in here. So there are two distinctly different things for mentor teachers. So to get to a professional license, you have to have a mentor. That mentor may not qualify for a stipend. The reason being is that you can't have, to get a stipend, you can't have more than 2 mentees. If I'm and you have to have 3 years of experience in that district, and you have to be a licensed teacher. So if I was a teacher and now I'm the counselor, and they've hired a new teacher, and as a counselor I'm going to mentor my replacement, can't get a stipend. Counts towards licensure, but not towards a stipend. So that's where you'll see some of this fluctuation when you see the decline in the second year. Some of that is because there's not a qualification. Next thing is districts have to apply for it. The difference on the third year, we have a lot of districts, they are required to have 2 years of mentoring. Districts are not required to have a third year. Districts don't always put in for the third year because it's only been funded once. So it's other reasons why it's not there. But I just wanted to follow that up with kind of some of the numbers and why we see some fluctuation. The new teachers make sense because we've had all the vacancies. The second year, a lot of reasons why. It doesn't mean that that teacher's not still there. Their mentor may not qualify anymore. And you could have a teacher that has a mentor, but their mentor doesn't qualify for the stipend for any number of reasons. So then they wouldn't be on this chart. Okay. So the next question, moving to taxes, because that's always exciting. How do property appraisals affect total dollar evaluation available for education? And the answer is not much. So districts, there are 12 different mill levies that districts can levy. Most of them don't levy that many, and that doesn't include recreation commissions, libraries, and museums, whose budgets could all run through the school board. Okay? Representative Wynn would be familiar with libraries because Kansas City, Kansas actually is the only district that funds a library. Most of them are recreation commissions that way. Only 2 of the levies, the 20 mil levy that's required by the state and capital outlay, are actually tied to the valuation. All of the other mill levies are tied to raising a specific dollar amount of tax revenue. So what that means is the appraisals go up, the mill levy goes down to get the same amount of money. The appraisals go down, the mill levy goes up to get the same amount of money. So again, capital outlay is the only one that districts keep that is tied. We can levy 8 mills and we get whatever the appraised value is with 8 mills plus the capital outlay state aid, which was part of the consensus estimates. Now, the other part of that's important about that, how much of that state aid you get is based on average valuation per pupil. And so the math is that simple. You take the appraised valuation, divide it by the number of pupils. Appraised valuation, yeah, make sure I was dividing right. And that number puts you on a list. And based on which category it is, the legislator has said, okay, here's the midpoint, or here's the point, and if your average valuation per pupil is lower than this, then you get state aid, and if it's above this, then you don't, or some of them go up or down from there. So average valuation per pupil is really important. And again, I go back to when we talked about this consensus, this is not education equity, this is tax equity, because you're trying to make it so that the community can provide similar programs with a similar tax levy. So, questions on that one? Must be getting bored. Okay, year-end balances. So I'll start with the big number. So in July, on July 1 of 2024, districts reported $2.88 billion in cash balances. But 1.55 billion of that was for capital outlay and bond and interest funds. So a bond and interest fund, you can't spend on anything else other than paying off the bond. Capital outlay, districts have been trying to increase their capital outlay because of what's happened to property and casualty insurance. The deductibles have gone up so high for a plan you can afford, districts have to keep more cash on hand to be able to cover all of any damage that isn't, because their deductibles are so high. So those two things go together. Every district budgets typically to spend all their capital outlay, never planning to, because if you have something like a HVAC unit go out, that could be several $100,000 that you budget for it, hoping you don't have to spend it that year. The next part is 69 million is in levied tax funds. So I'll use supplemental general as an example. So the LOB, there's money in there that you can't access because you're limited to the amount you can access based on calculating your LOB as a percentage of your general fund. You need to have money in the account so that you can deal with changes in valuation when your mill levy goes up or down, because that will help you get through those times when valuations adjust. That money just sits there and keeps moving forward. Similar to what we talked about with bond and interest. At the end of the bond and interest, you're going to use whatever's left there to pay off the bonds. If you plan it right, you pay them off early and save a whole bunch of interest. With other levied funds, you have that money in there so that, especially a year where you have a lot of people dispute their taxes, and then they come back and say, oh yeah, you have to pay this money back. Those are all times that make that very difficult. So that means it's about $854 million in what would be considered operational funds. General fund is zero. By the way, it wasn't actually zero. It should be zero, because if you have any money left over in your general fund, we take that back and we take it away from next year too. So districts do a lot of work to make sure there's nothing left in the general fund. Federal funds a lot of times are negative because you're waiting for the next federal payment to come out. These are the other ones. This would be, there are a lot of different funds that are in there, but so those would be operations funds. So that's about $1,800 per student statewide. So not a whole bunch of extra money there, but it's there. And then the question specifically is about co-ops and interlocals, and those were 32 million and 54 million respectively.
Representative Smoy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Is there like a limit, a cap on what a school district can keep in that revolving?
So, child nutrition has one. The federal USDA sets that at 3 months operating expenses. The rest of them don't necessarily. Contingency reserve used to have one, and then they took it away. So no, not specifically.
Is there a reason why they don't have a cap on it?
I don't know. What we recommend that districts look at someplace between 10 and 20%, because that helps you with cash flow in different times, and you can move if you don't have the money. So that's what we look at. We've done reports over time. We have some districts that are below 5%, and we have some that have been high, and we typically talk to those districts and say, if you don't want this problem fixed for everybody, you should do something about this.
Okay, thank you very much.
Oh, yeah, so special education would be a really good example. So you have to have a high cash balance in July because we give you a payment in June, which you've already made all your payments for, and we don't pay you again until October. So there are some of them where special education you need, and special education expenses are relatively unpredictable. So that would be one where you'd want to keep a relatively high cash balance. Yeah. All right. Donations to districts. So this was a specific question, is what happens to them when they show up on the budget? And they do, they show up on code 35. So if you go to Data Central on our website and look at any district's budget, If you go all the way down to like a page 132 or so, you'll get to code 35. And this is where districts would account for gifts and grants. And what they do is if you get a gift or a grant, you put it in there and you spend it out of there, it doesn't impact your state aid. Some gifts, grants certainly have specific things, some gifts do. We encourage districts to budget for getting a big gift, because if you don't, it's difficult to spend. Now, a lot of times, you're not going to spend it that year, and you can just republish them like that. So, but yes, it's accounted for, it's in the budget. The thing that's not in there is if it goes to a foundation. So a lot of districts have schools foundation. If somebody makes a donation to the school's foundation, it would not be in the budget. And in-kind donations do not show up, it would only be cash. Okay. All right, so agency funding sources. So we're almost done. So the question was about, so we talked about this whole $6.5 billion. How much is state and how much is federal? And so when you look at it, 4.5 billion is SGF, 1 billion for federal, and then another billion in other funds. So the other funds are fee funds, and then the children's camp, the CIF, all that would be in other funds as well. So then we also put what's out there for the state, for the agency's operation budget. I talked about this, is that everybody thinks we have lots of money, and it's a lot of money. But we have very little discretion on any of it. It's all very formulaic. And you can see that the vast majority of it, it gets paid out to districts. So the middle column is aid to local, so that's local districts. So that's either grants or just state aid. So the other question that kind of comes up with our FTE discussion is, so how much of that is actual salary and wages? And so we've had that, of the 20 million in SGF, about 11 is salary and wages, and then the federal 59 million, about 8 is. So the question is, where's that other $59 million go? Most of that is contracts to service centers. So one of them we've talked about a lot is our contract that pays for letters would be in that, because it's in our agency versus, it doesn't go direct, since it doesn't go directly to a school district and we're paying it to somebody else, it's in this one. And then all other funds would be there. It's about 7 million, or 3 million out of 7.
Could somebody have fun with that and give us a pie graph on the last two?
We certainly could.
I would like one. The visual of that would, I think, help my brain. I think I understand it, but I think the breakout might as well.
We can do pie graphs for both charts. Good. Actually, it's probably going to be several, but yeah, we'll get through it. Okay? All right, then my last slide is community eligibility programs. This came up during our discussion about the reduced price meals. So this year, there are 47 school systems with 177 schools. And I say school systems on purpose because there are 8 private systems, and then there's 1 state school and 1 interlocal that are also using this mechanism. And the average free lunch percentage for all those schools is 86%. And so there are a few districts that are district-wide. Most of them are targeted for schools based on the community that they're in. And in this case, what this means is that every student eats free. So every student gets free lunch. The district gets a higher reimbursement rate, but they don't get anything they get a higher reimbursement rate for the free lunch students. They don't get anything for the paid students. They do get the reduced reimbursement rate. So that's why when I talked about, there's kind of this sweet spot of if you don't have a high enough rate of free lunch, it costs quite a bit of money to do it. If you're above that, it's usually about 65% is kind of where you kind of get to a break-even point. The downside to this, and what's the reason some districts don't go that direction, is that when you're offering free lunch to everyone, sometimes students don't fill out the free and reduced lunch application. And if that's the case, you can use the household income form instead, but if they don't fill it out, then you may not qualify for at-risk funding because they wouldn't get counted as free lunch. So the districts that do it sometimes are really good with their community getting that information in. They just have to see how it impacts them.
Representative McNorden.
Thank you again, Mr. Chair. So state that again. So if it, I know one of our grade schools has that 60% or whatever that magic number is. So the rest of the school gets free lunch because of that. It's all inclusive. So are those other 35% counted as at risk then?
No.
Okay.
No, and that's what the issue is that if they weren't directly certified as free lunch, but their income would have qualified them for that, but they're getting free lunch anyway, sometimes they don't apply, and then the school doesn't have the record of them being low income, and then they don't get at-risk funding for that student.
So they weren't counted before, but with the new program, they would be included, is what you're saying?
No.
Just because they didn't apply?
So if they weren't directly certified and they don't apply, they don't count as free lunch no matter what their family's income is. And that's a downside to moving to the CEP program, is that it can have a negative impact on your at-risk funding.
Okay, thank you.
Well, thank you, Dr. Harwood. I know it's getting late in the day. 2 updates. Appreciate you presenting that to us. You were a week and a half delayed, so thank you for adding to it. Update, we are not going to have the hearing. I had tentatively scheduled a possible hearing tomorrow for the aligned bill, and that went through a rewrite, and it's going to get its actual bill number tomorrow, and so probably next week sometime and wherever it gets referred. So that's still kind of up in the air as well. So that, I had penciled it in as a possibility. People did submit testimony just in case it came out, but that's going to get moved to another time. So, and then the only other update before I let you go is on our state school board pay increase. Just wanted everybody to be aware there is a bill drafted for that, and department and Nick and people are looking at that now. And again, I don't know what the process of where, probably just back into appropriations, but is that going to do a hearing, or how's that going to work? But I'll keep you updated, and that's where it's at currently. With that, I don't have anything planned for tomorrow, so tomorrow's Wednesday and Thursday. I'll have a plan for next week, but this week, if we were going to be able to do the aligned bill and get the budget out and go from there. So I don't have a lot for the rest of the week. I'll leave it meeting on the call, the chair, if something comes up that I need to do, but plan on not a whole lot of big business. So if that's all right with everybody, if you want the afternoon off for a couple days, and then we'll go back to work next week. K-12 budget enthusiasts. All right, everyone. Thanks for tuning in, and we are adjourned.